Imagine you're asked to design a city from scratch, no constraints, no existing infrastructure to work around, a blank canvas, unlimited funding, and the backing of a national government. You hire the world's best architects, the most visionary urban planners, the most sophisticated engineers. You build it, and then almost nobody comes. This is not a hypothetical. It has happened more than once in more than one country. And the story of why these planned megacities fail is one of the most instructive and most expensive lessons in the history of urban development. The dream of building a city from nothing is almost as old as civilization itself. The ancient Egyptians relocated their capital. The Romans founded cities across 3 continents. Washington, D.C. was famously designed from a swamp. Peter the Great built St. Petersburg out of a Finnish marsh through sheer autocratic will, and it worked, eventually. But the modern era has produced a new generation of planned cities that are in a different category entirely. Cities built not from strategic, military, or political necessity, but from ambition, ideology, or the belief that a shiny new urban center can solve what older, messier cities cannot. The results almost universally have been instructive in ways their builders did not intend. Let's start with the most famous current example, NEOM, Saudi Arabia. Announced in 2017 by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman as part of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 modernization program, NEOM is a proposed futuristic region in the northwest of the country that would eventually cover an area larger than Belgium. Its flagship component is a project called The Line, a linear city that would stretch 170 kilometers across the desert in a perfectly straight line, housing up to 9 million people in a structure just 200 meters wide and 500 meters tall, with no roads, no cars, and a transit system running through the center. The estimated cost, $500 billion. The timeline, completion of the first phase by 2030. As of recent reporting, construction has progressed far slower than projected, with some analysts estimating that the timelines will stretch by decades and the costs will multiply. The Wall Street Journal reported in 2023 that internal plans had scaled back initial goals dramatically, with realistic near-term expectations of a city housing closer to 300,000 people, a fraction of original projections. But NEOM is far from the only example. Egypt is currently building a new administrative capital east of Cairo. A project that has been underway since 2015 is estimated to cost anywhere from $58 to $100 billion, and whose name the government has still never officially announced. China has spent decades and trillions building hundreds of new urban districts and satellite cities, many of which have become famous for something nobody intended, being ghost towns. Why do planned cities so often fail to attract residents? The answer is multifaceted, but at its core, it comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes cities work. Urban economists have a concept called agglomeration, the idea that cities derive their value not from their physical design, but from the concentration of human activity within them. Jobs attract workers, workers attract businesses, businesses attract more workers. Culture, networks, institutions, and amenities accumulate over time, each one making the city more attractive to the next arrival. This process takes decades or centuries to develop organically. It cannot be manufactured by design. Planned cities typically get the sequence backwards. They build the infrastructure first, then try to populate it. But people don't move to cities because the streets are wide and the buildings are new. They move because there are jobs or family or communities they belong to. A beautiful city with no jobs is just an expensive set. The second fundamental problem is that governments consistently confuse relocation with attraction. Many planned capital city projects, Nigeria's Abuja, Myanmar's Naypyidaw, Brazil's Brasília, succeeded in housing government workers by simply mandating that civil servants relocate, but mandating residence doesn't create a city. It creates a company town. And company towns, when the company's priorities shift, can collapse with startling speed. The third problem is what planners call the blank slate fallacy, the assumption that starting fresh without the messy legacy of existing infrastructure, property rights, and communities is an advantage. In reality, the messiness of existing cities is precisely what makes them work. The informal street vendor who sets up near the bus stop, the immigrant community that opens a neighborhood restaurant, the coffee shop that becomes a meeting place, these things don't appear in master plans. They emerge from human activity over time, and they are, in many ways, the entire point. The Chinese ghost city phenomenon is the most extensively documented case study in planned city failure. Beginning in the late 1990s and accelerating through the 2000s, China built dozens of new urban districts, called new towns, as part of its massive urbanization drive. Cities like Ordos Kangbashi in Inner Mongolia were built to house 1 million people and ended up housing a fraction of that. Photographs of Ordos, 8-lane boulevards empty of cars, grand plazas empty of people, apartment towers dark at night, circulated globally as symbols of misallocated ambition. China's defenders argued that the ghost cities were simply pre-built, that urbanization would fill them in over time, and in some cases this has proven partially true. Some Chinese new towns have filled in, others remain largely empty. The broader problem is that China built this housing using a debt-financed model in which local governments sold land to developers, and developers pre-sold apartments to buyers as investments, regardless of whether anyone intended to actually live in them. The result was a real estate market disconnected from actual human habitation, which eventually produced the Evergrande crisis of 2021, when the world's most indebted property developer collapsed, leaving millions of pre-sold apartments unbuilt and a financial contagion that continues to reverberate through the Chinese economy. Brasília is the more nuanced case study, the planned city that works, but not quite in the way its creators intended. Built from nothing in the Brazilian Cerrado in just 41 months and inaugurated in 1960, Brasília is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a stunning achievement of modernist architecture, and the administrative capital of the world's 5th largest country. It also has some of the worst traffic congestion in Brazil, a deeply car-dependent urban form, and has spawned a ring of informal satellite cities that house the lower-income workers who service the formal city, but cannot afford to live in it. Brasília worked. But it worked by creating a 2-tiered urban system, the planned utopia for the privileged and the unplanned periphery for everyone else. The financial cost of failed planned cities is staggering in its scale, particularly for developing nations that can least afford to absorb the loss. Egypt's new capital has required the country to take on billions in debt from Chinese state banks, at a moment when the Egyptian economy is under severe pressure and the Egyptian pound has lost more than half its value against the dollar in recent years. The opportunity cost is perhaps more significant than the direct financial cost. Every $1 billion invested in a speculative planned city is $1 billion not invested in upgrading the existing cities where the population actually lives. Cairo's informal settlements, which house roughly 40% of the city's population, lack basic infrastructure, reliable sanitation, and legal security of tenure. The resources being channeled into the shiny new capital in the desert could transform those communities. The planned city fallacy matters because governments keep attempting it, and the failures keep being enormously expensive. Saudi Arabia will spend hundreds of billions on NEOM. Egypt is spending tens of billions on its new capital. India has ambitious plans for new smart cities. Indonesia is literally relocating its national capital to a new city called Nusantara on the island of Borneo, a project already beset by cost overruns and developer defections. The pattern is consistent enough that it should prompt genuine reflection about what governments think they are buying when they commission a city from scratch. In many cases, the answer appears to be not a functional urban environment, but a statement about modernity, about ambition, about the power of the state, cities as spectacle rather than cities as habitat. Not all planned city projects are doomed. Songdo, South Korea, built on reclaimed land near Incheon, has struggled to reach its population targets but has gradually attracted residents through its proximity to the international airport and genuine business clusters. Shenzhen, which transformed from a fishing village to a megacity of 17 million people in 4 decades, demonstrates that concentrated economic incentives can generate explosive organic growth even in a planned framework. Though it's worth noting that Shenzhen's growth was driven by market forces and migrant labor, not by architectural master plans. The emerging consensus among urban economists is that cities cannot be conjured by design alone. They require what economists call fundamentals, geographic advantages, economic anchors, governance quality, and enough policy continuity to allow agglomeration to take hold over time. Without those fundamentals, the most beautiful master plan is just art. The $100 billion city that nobody wants to live in is not a mystery. It is a predictable consequence of treating cities as engineering problems rather than human ecosystems. The governments that have spent the most on planned cities from scratch have, almost universally, discovered that you cannot design your way to urban vitality. You have to grow it messily and slowly, the way cities have always grown. The lesson is available for anyone who wants to read it. Whether the next government with $100 billion and a dream will take the time to read it, That's a different question entirely.